Break Fix Podcast is all about capturing the living history of people from all over the autosphere, from wrench turners and racers to artists, authors, designers, and everything in between. Our goal is to inspire a new generation of petrol heads that wonder, how did they get that job or become that person? The road to success is paved by all of us because everyone has a story.
Involved in the car hobby since his childhood, our guest founded a vintage restoration business after completing his graduate degree. And by 1991, his career had evolved into being an automotive photographer, journalist, and author. Richard Prince has photographed for brands like Aston Martin, Audi, Bentley, Cadillac, Ferrari, Jaguar, Mercedes-Benz, and at some of the most interesting locations and racetracks around the world. He's published numerous books, as well as authoring and illustrating thousands of magazine articles. There's no doubt you've seen his photography in dozens of books and over 400 publications in more than 80 countries worldwide. And he's here to tell us all about his exciting journey filled with twists and turns that he never thought his career would take him on. And with that, Richard, welcome to Break Fix.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Well, Richard, like all good break fix stories, there's a superhero origin. So tell us about the who, what, when, and where of how you got involved in the automotive and motorsports world. Take us back to the beginning, up through 1988, and this restoration business and the journey into photography. How did that all play out?
Well, as with many people, it began as a hobby. Was mesmerized by certain cars from earliest childhood, and among them were early Corvettes, E-Type Jaguars, certain Ferraris. I was in love with first generation Camaros. Grew up at a time and in a place where cars were very central to young people's lives. What really got me going was we went on a family trip to California, and while there, my sister bought a copy of a car magazine, and they happened to have an article about a 1967 Corvette. I took one look at the photos of that car, and I was absolutely infatuated. I was, I think, about 12 years old. All of a sudden, I couldn't wait to get home because I wanted to get a job, start earning money so I can save money so that I could buy an early Corvette. And in fact, I did exactly that. I got home, and the only job I could get at that age was a paper route, and was cutting lawns and shoveling snow in the winter and doing anything I could to earn a little bit of money to save up for that car.
So do you think that magazine was a little bit of foreshadowing?
It is always interesting looking back at how small things can ultimately really profoundly change the trajectory of one's life. Had my sister not bought that magazine, well, I still would have been in love with cars, but wouldn't have been a turning point where I went from being interested in them as a 12-year-old to being absolutely obsessed with earning the money to buy one of these. And I was still obviously several years away from being able to drive one. But yeah, it is interesting that her simple act of buying that magazine and sharing it with me changed a lot for me.
What did you go to school to study? Was photography at the front of your mind? Was that something you wanted to do, or even that was like a hobby in the background, something you were just doing because you enjoyed it?
It was a hobby, and I was not obsessed with it. Around 4 or 5 years old, my grandfather bought my sister and I want to say a toy camera. It wasn't a toy, they were real, but they were inexpensive kind of throwaway cameras. And this was in the late 1960s. I was fascinated with it and loved it. A few years later, my parents gifted me a Polaroid camera. And of course, that was like magic technology as well. But I did not, as a child, aspire to be a professional photographer. It just never occurred to me. I wasn't infatuated with photography. And I went to school for unrelated subject. My undergraduate degree was in English and history. And simply because I was interested in those subjects, I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up. Followed my heart and studied what I was interested in.
And then went to graduate school and then started a restoration business. How does that all work out?
Well, it was a very intense hobby for my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I. We did a complete restoration, our first complete restoration when I was at the end of my high school career. We had a 66 Corvette that had some rust in the chassis, and the best way to fix that was to take the body off the chassis. And we didn't have facilities, we didn't really have all the tools we needed, and we certainly didn't have the experience we needed, but we were pretty fearless, as a lot of teenagers are. So we dove right in, and working out of our home garage at her parents' house and mostly working in the driveway, we did a complete body off the chassis restoration of that car in circa 1981, 82. And I went off to college in Manhattan and I did my 4 years there. And then, still not knowing what I wanted to do with myself, decided to go to law school. So I went to California, completed law school, and was working at a law firm in Los Angeles. And I had mixed feelings about staying there on the West Coast, but I likely would have, at least for some amount of time. But it was actually my girlfriend, who became my wife, who was really determined to turn our hobby, which we both loved very much, into a business. I was a little hesitant about that. I thought it might take a lot of the joy out of it if we had to do it every day rather than doing it because we wanted to do it. I did realize it would be much more difficult later on to walk away from a career and take a risk and start a business. I don't know if it was a logical choice, but the logic seemed to be I'm at the very beginning of my legal career, so I don't have a lot of time and effort invested in a trajectory there. And the trajectory is either toward a partnership if you're with a firm, or typically toward building your own business, building up clientele and hiring people. Once you get years into that investment, it's very difficult to step away. And also, of course, it's very difficult to step away from the income. I went from working your typical lower paying jobs through junior high school and through college. And then all of a sudden I was earning a new lawyer's salary, and it was a lot of money to leave behind. But 3, 4, 5, 7 years down the road, it would have been way more difficult. So I agreed to give it a try, give it 1 year, start a business and see how it goes. So that's how we ended up in the car restoration business.
That was 1988. And in 1991, according to your resume, you started working as a photographer. So in those 3 years, what changed? What was your big break? How did you suddenly go from doing the restorations and all these other plethora of things, as you said, trying to find your way, and now you're behind the lens of a camera?
Yeah, that's another very unusual part of my story. The answer involves my wife. We were very, very busy right from the moment we opened the doors. We specialized in old Corvettes. At any given time, had 5 or 6 or 7 of something else in the shop. We typically had about 18 or 20 vintage Corvettes and 5 or 6 or 7 of something else. And that ranged from your typical muscle cars, SS Chevelles and Shelby Mustangs, to one-offs and odd cars. I had one customer who was really fascinated with Facel Vegas. It was a French-made car. We restored a vintage MG. We had a customer with a vintage Bentley, a one-off custom-bodied Bentley. Well, what happened was my wife wrote a letter to the editor of Vet Magazine. The editor at the time was a man named D. Randy Riggs. He received her letter and was planning to publish it, but he had some questions. So he called the number that she provided in the letter, which was the shop number, and he spoke with her first. The name of the business was Real Cars. And he said, "What's Real Cars?" And she explained it's a full service restoration business. He said, "Oh, what a coincidence. I am looking for somebody with a lot of hands-on experience with the cars who can write a column for me every month. Would you be interested?" She doesn't like writing. It's not her thing. So she immediately said, "No, definitely not for me, but maybe my husband would be interested. He's done quite a lot of writing all through his schooling career, and he enjoys writing." So she called me and I was in the shop. And it's astounding when I think back. It was literally a 2-minute conversation, a very simple happenstance that changed the trajectory of my life in a way. We were super busy. We were open long hours. We had typically between 12 and 15 employees. There was a lot to do and a lot to manage. And so she called me in and said, "The editor of Vet Magazine is on the phone and he wants to ask you a question." And so he said, "I'm looking for somebody to write a column. Would you be interested?" Without thinking deeply at all, I just said, "A column about what?" And he said, "It's up to you. Anything that you think is of interest to Corvette hobbyists, you write about whatever you want." Literally in 3 seconds, I said, "Okay, sounds like fun. I enjoy writing, but with one caveat. As long as you and I can agree that if you don't like what I send you, or I don't like doing it, we can part friends and there'll be no hard feelings." And he said, "Deal." That's how I got started. I started writing a column, a monthly column for Vet Magazine, and it was toward the end of 1991. And I think the first column was published in March of 92. Another kind of funny part of this is I never discussed payment with him. I was so focused on what was going on in the shop, the things that I was responsible for. It didn't occur to me to say, does this pay? How much does it pay? it was a release for me. It was recreational, believe it or not. I enjoyed it. Great diversion from what I was doing every day. A few weeks later, a check arrived in the mail. That made it even better. So I continued doing. I wrote that column for more than 10 years. Column quickly led to requests to write more. I did quite a few technical articles in the beginning and car features as well, and those required photography. And initially, for the first few photography assignments, that went to somebody else. So I was asked to write about a certain car or a certain procedure. Somebody else was asked to do the photography, and that didn't work well. I hate to say it, but the stereotype about the difficult artist is really grounded in reality. So some of the time, the photographer just didn't even show up. It felt like half the time when the photographer showed up, the photos were no good. They didn't work. Why not? The location was terrible. The light was terrible. The lab ruined the film. All I could think of was, well, who chose the location? You did. Who chose the time of day when the light was no good? You did. And how many times can the lab ruin the film? We did a lot of photography as part of the restoration business. Every extensive restoration that we did was photo documented. So the owner of the car, when the restoration was completed, got a photo out. It was something nice to do for the customers, and it also was a way for us to document the work that we were doing. It wasn't creative photography or art photography, but it was photography. So we were shooting 25, 30, 35 rolls of film every week because it was a busy shop with a lot of cars. And I never once had the lab ruin the film. So I quickly lost patience with the photographers. I was doing it because I enjoyed it, not because it was my livelihood or I needed to do it. I was doing it because I enjoyed it. And when the photographer didn't show up with the lab ruin the film, it certainly took the fun out of it for me. So I immediately concluded I either had to just stop doing this or do the photography myself. That's how I became a photographer.
Necessity breeds invention, right? In this case, I guess it begets a solution.
Yes. I didn't have any formal training. I did have the kind assistance of my first editor, the man I mentioned, D. Randy Riggs. He was already an established, accomplished, talented photographer. He wasn't in the habit of taking people who didn't know what they were doing under his wing, but I already had a relationship with him and with the publisher because I was writing the column. So he helped me in the beginning to really get a grasp of the basics. It's not rocket engineering. It was, of course, a little more challenging back then. We're talking 1992, no digital. It was all film. So there was obviously a disconnect between shooting the images and then seeing the images. So it was a little harder to learn quickly. Today, of course, you can see your mistakes immediately. Again, it wasn't super complicated for me, sort of a visual person, and I can think in a 3D kind of a way. It was pretty easy to get pretty good quickly. Getting better and better, of course, became more and more challenging.
So, if I follow your chronology correctly and listening to other interviews you've done and past times that we've gotten together, part of your story involves not just Corvette, but General Motors and the birth of Corvette racing. And you mentioned that you wrote this column for Vette magazine for nearly 10 years. So if I do my math right, that puts us into the early 2000s, and Corvette racing started in 1997, thereabouts. So how does that all come together? Is it a result of Vette magazine? Was there another random phone call that got you in the door at General Motors?
That's an even stranger story. I say it is a most unlikely sequence of unrelated events that led me to where I am today. What happened with that was my wife and I, discovered a long lost, very well-known Corvette race car. We first encountered the car in 1988. I was after the engine that was in it. The engine that was in the car at the time was the original engine for a different Corvette. They were both 67s. So there was a 67 coupe here on Long Island that had been raced since anybody could remember. The man who owned it owned two Corvettes at the same time. And in 1973, he took the 427, 435 horse engine out of his convertible. It was original to the convertible. And he put it in the coupe and went racing with the coupe. He sold the convertible with a different engine. 1988, we contacted him with the intention of buying the engine, the Tri-Power 427 that was in his coupe, buying the convertible that engine was original to, and reuniting them. We called him. He was very happy to sell us the engine. I went to see the engine, and it didn't occur to me maybe the car it's in is something worth looking at. When I got there, there were things about that car that were super intriguing. It was a 67 coupe. It had been on MSO until 1987. The man who owned it loaned it to somebody who raced it at Bridgehampton, crashed it in 87. And the man who owned it thought his intense racing days were winding down. And when he fixed the crash damage, he decided he would put the car on the street for the first time. Put more of an interior in it and windshield wipers and turn signals and so on and so forth. And he went to a DMV office in New York in 1988 and registered that car for the first time. I thought, well, that's interesting. Here's a car that was never registered. So obviously somebody bought this car to race when it was new. The man that owned it at the time, he bought it in 73 and he did not know anything about its history prior to 73. And at the time, neither did I. I examined the car and there were some really intriguing things about the car itself. It was a car equipped with an option called C48. C48 was a heater defroster delete option. So every 67 Corvette started life with a heater and defroster system. Buyers could delete that. Chevrolet built 35 no heater cars in 1967. And I believe technically those cars were not even street legal because I believe in 1967, every car sold for street use in America had to have a windshield defroster. So it was kind of a wacky option. And a Corvette started in 1967. The base price was a little over $4,000 and you could easily get over $5,000 with some options. And a really loaded car would approach $6,000. So who would delete a heater system to save a few dollars? It didn't make sense unless you were buying a car specifically to race and only the race. I looked at the car and I knew it was a factory no heater car. The most interesting thing about that is there were no rules. Anybody could buy a no heater car. If a buyer bought the L88 engine package, which was an all-out road racing engine package, they could not get a heater in the car. Every L88 produced in 1967 was a no heater car. They produced 20 L88s. Of the 35 no heater cars produced, 20 of them were L88s. 15 were not. I can do simple math. If you are looking at a 67 Corvette that you believe to be a factory no heater defroster car, there is better than a 50-50 chance you are looking at a factory L88 car. And there were a few other things. The car had J56 brakes, which by itself is not super rare. I think they made 236 J56 brake cars. That's a heavy-duty brake option. Every L88 had to have a J56 brake option. All of the pieces for the factory option were there, but there were also some pieces in the brake system that differed from normal production and that were not part of the J56 production option. So that was highly unusual and quite interesting to me. The front chassis crossmember had an area where there was a section cut out. Steel had been shaped, placed in there, and welded in there to create a recess. There's normally a recess in the front crossmember to provide clearance for the harmonic balancer on big blocks. So starting in 65, they all had a recess for the balancer. That car had an additional recess. The man who had the car didn't know what it was. He said, that was there when I bought it. I don't know what it's for. I knew what it was for. It was to provide clearance for a dry sump on a big block Chevrolet engine. So I said to myself, you're looking at a car that was never registered until 1987. It has an unusual brake system that goes beyond the factory big brake setup. It's a factory no heater, no defroster car. And whoever owned this car prior to 1973 was running a dry sump big block. If you put that in the context of racing in the late 60s into the early 70s, big block Corvettes raced in SCCA production, or if they were racing in FIA sanctioned races like Le Mans or Sebring or Daytona, modifications were allowed, but I'm not aware, and I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I was not aware of anybody running a production-based Corvette with a dry sump big block in it in that time frame. Dry sump big block Chevrolet engines were found at that time in Can-Am cars, for example, not in production Corvettes. Putting all the pieces together, I said, this is a super interesting car. Well, we ultimately ended up buying the car. Still didn't know its early history. We were researching it. It was a long, tedious process, but we ultimately got back to the owner before the man we bought it from and the owner before him. And that car was, in fact, a factory L88 car. It was owned new by an oil company called the Sunray DX Oil Company. They bought it specifically to go road racing from Yanko Chevrolet. Yanko race prepared the car, and it was the GT winner at the 12 Hours of Sebring in 1967, and it was the GT winner in the 24 Hours of Daytona in 1968. So it was super, super rare, highly valuable, and fascinating car. We restored it to its Sebring configuration, spent thousands of hours researching the history of the car. I traveled all over the country, did video interviews with everybody who was still alive, who was connected to the car. It took me from coast to coast and, believe it or not, to the Eisenhower Presidential Library, because a man named Clyde Wheeler was a vice president at Sunray DX Oil. He later became a cabinet member in the Eisenhower administration, and all his papers ended up in the Eisenhower Memorial Library in Kansas. So anyway, my wife and I restored it, we showed it, we vintage raced it, we adored it, and we commissioned an artist to do a painting of that car. It was the first and last time we've ever hired an artist to do a painting for us. I asked some people at Chevrolet who I was friendly with if they could recommend an automotive fine artist. They recommended Charles Maher in Michigan. We hired him, he did the painting, and when it was completed, he asked us if he could display it at an Automotive Fine Artists Society show in Detroit. And of course, we said sure. He displayed that painting at an AFAS show. Coincidentally, a man named Gary Claudio went to see that show, Corvette guy, car guy. He fell in love with the painting and wanted to buy it. And the artist explained to him it was a commissioned work. It's not for sale. Somebody already owns it. And Gary said, well, maybe whoever you did the work for would sell it to me. And the artist said, I doubt it. I'll pass your info along to them, but I doubt they'll sell it. It's a couple in New York, and they own the actual car that's shown. That was in 1992. 3-4 years later, that same man, Gary Claudio, was the marketing manager for Chevrolet Racing. A planning meeting, they were discussing the livery for this race program that's coming. He was planning the public unveil of the program, which took place at SEMA in 1998. And he's a Corvette buff and a Corvette history enthusiast. And he thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could put together a display with some historically significant vintage Corvette race cars? And he immediately thought of that painting and the Sunray DX L88. So he tracked down the artist, and from the artist got my phone number and my name. One day in late 1997, my phone rang, and it was another astounding conversation, as was the conversation with Randy Riggs. It was a couple of minutes long, and it really did change the trajectory of my life. He called and asked for me, and I said, this is Richard Prince. And he said, Richard, I want to ask a big favor of you, but before I ask the favor, I have to know if I can trust you. I thought it was a prank. I was living in New York at the time on Long Island. I was working in Manhattan. The guy on the other end of the phone had a distinct Long Island accent. So I said, okay, this is one of my idiot friends, and there's some kind of a joke or a prank. And I couldn't place the voice. I didn't know who it was in the middle of writing a story, and I was busy. And he said, okay, whatever, I'll play along. So he said, before I ask you for this big favor, I have to know if I can trust you. And I said, buddy, you can trust me with your life. What do you need? And I thought I was going to get a punchline and it was going to be a haha. And he said, my name is Gary Claudio. I'm the marketing manager for Chevrolet Racing. And I want to borrow your 1967 L88 race car for a display. We have a factory road race program coming and we're going to unveil it. And of course, in that instant, I knew that it wasn't a prank. And he said, I got your name and number from Charles Maher. I saw your painting a few years ago. I said, yes, I'm happy to loan you the car. And we had another historic Corvette race car, an SCCA National Championship winning C1 Corvette at the time. And I said, I have another Corvette you might be interested in, and you can borrow both of them. And now I'd like to ask you for a favor. And I did say the answer to my question doesn't change the outcome of my willingness to loan you these cars. I said at the present time, I'm writing and photographing cars for a whole variety of magazines. And this race program sounds really cool. I would like to basically join the team in bed with the program and have unlimited permission to go wherever they go and to photograph whatever it is that they're doing. And I'll stick with the program. It was scheduled to be a 3-year program. So there was about 1.5 years of testing and then 3 years of racing. I said, I'll start immediately. I'll go where they go. I'll stick with the testing and the 3 years of racing. And when it's over, I will produce a book about it. I wasn't asking GM to pay for it. I was just asking for permission to do it. Without hesitating, he said, you got it. So that, in a nutshell, is how I became a racing photographer.
And to not take us down a slightly different path, but I have a question to ask because you're probably one of the few people that might know where Jake came from. Is it because of Gary Claudio? Is it something that somebody said? Where does that iconic figure of Corvette racing come from since you were there at its inception?
Yeah, Gary Claudio figures prominently in that story. And it's the sort of thing that quickly morphs into sort of an urban legend. And over time, the details are forgotten and the key players can be forgotten. Some number of years ago, I did a deep dive into that and I wrote a very detailed article about Jake because I saw all kinds of explanations around that I knew were wrong. What happened with that is some of the team management, most specifically Doug Feehan, who was the program manager for Corvette Racing from the beginning for many years, thought that a key to the program's success was reaching younger people. GM is a very conservative company, and it has been for a long time. Feehan and others thought we need to get edgier. We need to find ways to reach out to and to make friends with younger people. So he actually hired a very small, edgy marketing agency that was based in New York City, run by a guy named Eddie Jabbour, to come on board and to help figure this out. How do we develop this persona and reach a younger audience? Eddie came to Le Mans to just start to get a feel for the team and to get an understanding, sort of brainstorm and come up with some ideas. At the same time, there was a crew member, one of the truck drivers and one of the pit crew members, a guy named Don Nell, who had a little bit of a fascination with skulls. It's just sort of something that he enjoyed. It's like sort of a biker culture thing. You know, skulls figure prominently in mythology and in literature, and Don just loved these skulls. He started putting little skull stickers and little skull pins around on the car. And some executives at GM were highly annoyed by that. And it became a little bit of a cat and mouse thing. So Don would hide these little skulls. They'd appear here, there, everywhere. And then somebody from GM would take the sticker off the car or these little metal pins. Eddie took notice of that, thought, how can we sort of harness this? This is edgy and this is kind of funny and cool. And he literally, on a napkin, drew what became Jake. He conceived the idea with Gary Claudio doing this sort of stylized skull that incorporated key elements of the Corvette emblem. That napkin and that drawing still exists. That's where the skull logo came from. The name Jake came from Gary Claudio. Claudio, prior to Corvette, was with Pontiac Racing one night at a race. Gary and some of the crew people went out and they had dinner and they had probably too much to drink. And on the way back to the hotel, somebody stole a lawn ornament, you know, one of the old-fashioned, the little guy holding the little pail. So they stole this lawn ornament because they thought it was funny and they brought it back to the track the next day. It became sort of the team mascot, this lawn ornament. Dressed them up and they got a credential for him. Gary named the lawn ornament Jake. And it was named after a recently born baby of one of the team principals, one of the team owners, had a son born. The son's name was Jake, so they named the team mascot after the son of the team owner. Once the skull logo was created, Eddie Jabbour drew it out on the napkin. Gary christened the new mascot Jake. So that is how that happened. And then there was a stretch there where GM really didn't embrace it. People at GM who thought it was the wrong image. So there was this little bit of tension and this constant back and forth with these Jakes showing up everywhere. They started showing up everywhere. It was showing up on T-shirts. It seemed to be coming from a website called Bad Boy Vets. And the website was created to look like a couple of 14 or 15-year-old bad boys, bratty young teenagers created this thing. It was really edgy, but it was actually Eddie Jabbour who created the website. And that was pushing this Jake Skull logo. Over time, the fans really embraced it. Pretty soon, some designers at Chevrolet took a liking to it. It reached sort of tidal wave proportions where the people at GM who thought it was a bad idea just couldn't resist anymore. eventually it was completely embraced by General Motors. And you'll see Jake now, it's all over the C8s. It was on the C7s. It was on C6s. It was imprinted on the under hood insulation, and it's showing up embroidered on seats and in body graphics. So that's a somewhat abridged version of the Jake logo.
As we switch gears into the next segment, one question that sort of still lingers here from your origin story is, what about your restoration business? Is Real Cars still around? Is that something you're still doing now for fun, or did you put all that to bed?
Well, we sold that business in 1995 and stayed on in a transition period. We sold it to a friend of ours who was already in the restoration business. He's an interesting character. He was actually also obsessed with Corvettes and turned a hobby into a business long before we did. But he was always sort of flying under the radar. He didn't have proper operating licenses, and we were completely compliant, which was a full-time job in and of itself. We had painted, so we had permits for everything: paint storage, emissions, the spray booth, fire suppression system, waste management, all this. It's very difficult, especially in New York, to maintain a legitimate business doing automotive work and body work and painting. And so he needed to sort of come out of the shadows, and it was a match made in heaven. So he bought the business and he kept his name. So the name no longer exists, but he's still going. He's still very actively restoring, doing beautiful work, mostly Corvettes, but other cars as well. So we stayed on through the end of 1995 and then stayed there about another 5 months because we had a car of our own that was in process and it was apart. The body was off the chassis. And I knew at that point we were going to move on to other things, and we needed to put that car back together because otherwise it would stay apart for a long, long time. So we stayed there until like May or so of 1996. And we had a target date. That car went to the special collection in Bloomington for display there in June. So we had a good date to work toward, and we finished that car. After that, it was a long time before my wife and I did any restoration work again. I got super busy starting in 1997 with the racing work, and it was a whole new environment, a whole new world. And the established photographers who had been shooting racing for a long period of time, some of them at that point already 20 plus years, they all told me the same thing. They all had the same advice, which is, this is a brutal business. The programs come and go. The factories are in, they're out. Don't get used to it. Don't give up your day job. And my day job was writing and photography for primarily editorial clients. We're working on my first book at that point in late 98 or early 99. But I followed their advice. I didn't give up my day job. And the racing just got bigger and busier and busier and busier. So I ended up with 2 jobs and then 3 jobs. There wasn't time for the cars.
Well, Richard, let's take a pit stop here as we transition into the next segment. And let's talk about your travels around the world. And, we ask folks on the show all the time, is there a bucket list track you'd like to race at or you'd like to attend? Or if you could go back in time, which driver on which track, those kinds of things. But you've been to so many interesting places in the world and to so many locations. I kind of have to frame it in a very simple way, which is, as a photographer, what is some of the best or maybe worst places to photograph in terms of racetracks in the world?
I am 100% committed to find happiness everywhere. So even the tracks that I enjoy less for one reason or another, or the events that I enjoy less, I still enjoy them. I just enjoy them less. If I had to pick one track, one event, it would be the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I love the long races to begin with. I'm a history buff. My undergraduate degree is in history. I still read a lot about history. The only real TV I watch is documentaries about history. And of course, the sense of history there is unmatched. That race began in 1923, and aside from a few years of interruption during the Second World War, it has been held every year, and every year the best teams, the best drivers with the best cars come from everywhere in the world to race there. You ask any driver in any discipline, multi-Formula One world champions, MotoGP world champions, best top fuel drag racers in the world. It doesn't matter. Every one of them wants to add a win at Le Mans to their resume. I just adore it. So I went there for the first time in 2000 when Corvette went there. Corvette did not go during the COVID year in 2020, so I didn't go either. This year was my 24th 24 Hours of Le Mans, and it's not the same experience, of course. There's no getting around that there's always an evolution. The first time for anything is going to be different from the second time, and the third time is going to be different from the second time, and the 10th time is going to be different from the 5th time. But I've never gotten tired of it or bored with it. It's exciting for me every single year, and I look forward to it every single year. And part of the challenge there, and this is not exclusive to Le Mans, but it applies to Le Mans, it applies to everywhere I go. I still go to new tracks once in a while. I've photographed over 1,000 races now. A lot of the tracks I've been there 30, 35, 40, 50 times, but I still go to some new ones. One of the great challenges and thrills of going back to the same place for the 20th time or the 25th time or the 50th time is trying to see it in a different way, trying to find something new, one new angle of view, one new location, one new something to create a different photograph that I didn't create the first 15 or the first 40 times I've been there. It's obviously increasingly difficult the more times I've been to a given track. I say there's always something new, and the challenge is to find it. Always something new. And it's super, super gratifying to do that.
We've had the privilege of sitting down with a lot of different pro drivers on the show, and you hear all about the war stories and the battles and the things that happened on track. And there you are on the other side of the fence, as Bill Warner likes to say when he was here. And you got to capture those moments, those battles, those wars that we saw play out on television, and that we hear the big fish stories later and all those kinds of things. But there was a point in your life, and as you said, it's a series of unrelated events that have come together where these two things converged. The story we saw on TV, the story that you hear about, and your life, those two paths cross. And it takes us to VIR in 2019. And what I'm referring to is, if anybody saw it, it's Catherine Legg's crash in the NSX. And unbeknownst to many of us that were watching it on TV, you're like, oh my God, she wrecked, this and that. There's another side to the story that many people don't know. And so I want to open the conversation up for you to share that experience in your own words, what that crash meant to you and how it changed your life in an impactful way.
No pun intended. Yes, it was an impactful way because I was impacted. Racing it's a dangerous environment. Any way you slice it, way, way safer than it's ever been, but it's still a dangerous environment. And credentialed photographers are allowed to go in areas that the public is not, where it is potentially more dangerous. And on that fateful day at the IMSA race at VIR in August of 2019, I was, in one sense, in the wrong place at the wrong time. The car crashed. It struck the steel barrier, and I was right there, and I saw the car coming about a second before the impact. So I didn't have a lot of time. I had 3 cameras with me, 3 bodies, 3 lenses, actually set them down and set myself down, crouched down behind the crash barrier. The barriers at VIR are not set in concrete. They're just set into the earth. It wasn't raining at that moment, but it had been raining in the days prior to the race, so the ground was particularly soft. The grass was wet still, which helped. The car probably had a tire failure. I don't think there was a definitive understanding of what happened. There wasn't 2 cars that came together. The NSX by itself suffered a sequence of failures that left Catherine with no steering and no brakes. And the car made a left turn, went off the track, and went along the grass, which was wet, which didn't help slow it down, obviously. It struck the steel barrier going quite fast. I was told it was going at about 156 miles an hour when it struck the barrier, and it drove the barrier back about 3 feet. And one of the steel I-beams supporting it struck me in my torso. This has changed now. They did remedy this, but at that time, there was about a 3-foot wide aisleway between the steel crash barrier and a cabled catch fence. The cabled catch fence came about because of the condominiums that they built trackside there. So they built the condos, and they didn't want the people who were enjoying the condos to be able to go right up to the crash barrier. So they built this cabled catch fence, and they only put it a few feet off the crash barrier, I guess, to maximize the front lawns of the condominiums. So there was no escape. I couldn't get far away from the barrier, so I hit the ground and I was struck. It was an interesting experience for sure. Never lost consciousness. I wasn't even knocked over, but it was a hard hit. Initially, I thought I actually might be dead because I was at a racetrack and it was, of course, noisy. There was a race going on still. And in the instant that I was struck, I heard the most complete silence that I've ever experienced in my life. I was fully conscious and was thinking to myself, is this the beginning of the journey after one's life concludes? This pure silence. I gathered my thoughts and said, I don't think you're dead. I think I'm very much alive. I knew I'd been injured. I thought I probably had at least a couple of broken ribs, but my breathing felt fine. My head wasn't struck, so I wasn't worried. And I really just wanted to get out of there. I didn't want to be part of the story. The Corvettes were in the battle there for the lead in the class. They were, I think, running second and third or second and fourth at the point where the accident took place. And there was about 20 minutes left in the race. And so I knew even if they didn't pass, one of them didn't pass to take the lead, they were going to be on the podium. I just wanted to get out of there and shoot the podium. But fortunately, I couldn't escape because when the car hit, they were light truck tires that were bolted together. And the car actually, I think, dove under the tires before it hit the steel barrier. And it pitched a whole grouping of, it was about 17 tires or something, over the steel barrier. And then it landed between the fence and the barrier. And I was quite fortunate that didn't land on me. I did a rough calculation later on, and that grouping of tires weighed about 1,600 pounds. So had that landed on me, we wouldn't be speaking today. But it blocked my exit. It was my left side that was struck, and I had temporary paralysis. I couldn't move my left arm, and I had, as I said, 3 cameras and 3 lenses to carry, including a 300 millimeter 2.8, and I think I had a 500 millimeter 2.8. So they're big and they're heavy, and I had one arm, so I couldn't get out of there. And that turned out to be fortunate. A friend of mine, a man named Bill Miller, who is a commercial airline pilot in real life, but he's also a huge racing enthusiast, and he's a professional race spotter. So he goes to, I think, just about all the IMSA races, and he works as a spotter for one or sometimes more teams. So they place people around the track with a radio headset, and they're helping the driver to understand the track situation. If there's a crash or there's oil on the track or they're coming up on a slower car, whatever the circumstances are, the spotter can help the driver. So that's what Bill Miller was doing. And he happened to be right nearby, and he saw the whole thing, and he came running over, and he was on the other side of the catch fence, and he was screaming at me, "You're getting in that ambulance. You don't know what you're talking about." I was saying, I got the wind knocked out of me, but I think I'm okay. And he was screaming, "You're not okay. You're in shock. You could be badly hurt. You've got to go to the medical center, blah, 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 blah." And I was stubborn and foolish and resisting. I looked okay. I wasn't bleeding. I had no external apparent injuries. The emergency crews got there like a dummy. I would have avoided the ambulance, but Bill Miller was screaming at me, and he was screaming at the EMTs. "You've got to take this guy. He was struck." Being stubborn and foolish, I was explaining to the EMTs, "Yeah, I did get hit, but I think I'm okay. I feel fine. I don't need to go with you." Bill Miller was behind that fence. I won't repeat what he was saying because he was using some foul language, really screaming at me, and I was sort of feeling pressured there. Then what happened was I lost the vision in my left eye. I initially thought there was maybe some mud on my glasses. And you can see this actually on the TV coverage. The helicopter was hovering above. I took my glasses off to clean the mud off of them, and there was no mud on them. That was a horrifying moment because I realized I lost the vision of my left eye. And I thought, my optic nerve's been severed, or my retina's disconnected, or something horrible has happened here, and I'm now half blind. So I agreed to get in the ambulance. Bill Miller screaming at me, and I lost the vision in my left eye. So that's how I ended up in the ambulance. And then there's no medical center at VIR. There's just a medical room where there's a doctor and a nurse and a blood pressure machine and some basics. So we were on our way there, and we got about halfway, and the vision returned in my eye. And I then just wanted out of the ambulance like a moron. And again, I felt okay. I was in pain. It hurt, but it wasn't excruciating pain. And my breathing was fine. I wanted out of the ambulance, but of course, once I was in, they couldn't let me go, if nothing else for liability reasons. We got back to the medical room. No external injuries. I wasn't bleeding. Nothing was obviously wrong. I took my blood pressure, that is the one and only time in my whole life I've had high blood pressure. My blood pressure is normally picture perfect, exactly where it's supposed to be. So when I heard the numbers, I was like 156 over 119 or something. I thought, oh boy, that's not good. But they looked at it and said, well, at your age, and you've just been involved in a traumatic accident, your blood pressure's not bad. It's okay. And I'm thinking, not bad. It's never ever been high under any circumstances. Anyway, they said, you were struck in the torso. You really need at least to get an X-ray. You need to go to the hospital and get an X-ray. Do you have somebody who can drive you? I said, well, I have a lot of friends and a lot of people I know here, but everybody I know is here working. So yeah, I can get somebody to drive me, but it's not going to be for a couple of hours. I said, well, that's no good. You have to go now. And I said, well, I'll drive myself. And they said, well, we can't let you drive yourself because you suffered at least some kind of an injury. There was a medevac helicopter there, but they dismissed it because I kept saying I'm fine. And then they gave the ambulance crew the bad news that they had to take me to the hospital, and the race had ended at that point, and I think they were ready to go home. So they were a little disappointed. And I was a little disappointed because I really didn't want to go to the hospital. But that's where I was going. So got in the ambulance, and the whole time I'm saying, I'm okay, I'm fine. So they never put the lights on and never put the siren on. We were just stuck in traffic over an hour because the race had ended, and VIR is in a rural area in Southern Virginia, right near the North Carolina border. And there's just one country road in and one out. And there were 40,000 people there watching the race. So when the race ended, it was a big giant traffic jam. So it was a long slog to get to it was a little over an hour to get to the hospital. We went to Danville Regional Hospital, which is not the place to go to if you've suffered a severe traumatic injury. But I kept saying I'm okay. I looked okay. So that's where we went. And it was terrible for my wife. It was much worse for my wife than it was for me. I was calm. I was at peace. I didn't understand what my injuries were at that point, but I was okay. And once I was in the ambulance, I thought, well, I better call her.
And nothing like this had ever happened to you before. This is the first time in all your many years.
To this date, I've never had a car accident. I've driven over 1 million miles. I've never had a car accident. I never had a broken bone in my life. And I did stupid things as a kid. I was just lucky. I fell off my bike plenty of times. I rode motorcycles, dirt bikes, got banged up and scraped up and cut and so on and so forth. I needed some stitches when I was a child here and there, but I never had a broken bone, never had a blunt force trauma injury. So it was all new. I called my wife in the ambulance, and she watches every race. She's a massive race fan, a much bigger race fan than I am. She watched the race, and as I said, there was a crash at the end, and she said, yeah, I know. The Acura really whacked the wall. And I said, well, I was kind of caught up in that accident. And she immediately lost her mind, started screaming, don't lie to me. I know you're lying to me. How bad is it? Don't sugarcoat it. And then we lost the cell signal. Cell phone coverage is not so great because, again, it's a rural area. And we were literally crawling along, and I had no cell signal. She absolutely freaked out. And she found some numbers from some of my photographer friends and started making phone calls, and none of them knew anything. They knew I wasn't at the podium and I wasn't in the photo room after it was over, which was a little weird, but I was out there by myself when the crash happened. She got no information. It wasn't until it was about an hour and 10 minutes later when we got to the hospital that I was able to call her again. So that was a very, very difficult time for her because she intuitively knew that it was bad. And it was bad, as it turns out. So they had called the hospital ahead of time, and it's a regional hospital. There were no specialists there. They had to call specialists. So they had an x-ray tech, and he did an x-ray to start with. The loss of the vision of my left eye was the first horrifying moment. The look on the face of the x-ray technician after he did the x-ray was the second horrifying moment. And I said that to him. He was looking at his screen and looking at me, looking at the screen, looking at me. And he had a look of absolute disbelief on his face. And I said, you were looking at me as though you find it shocking that I'm still alive. What do you see? And he didn't answer me. And I said, look, I know I at least have a couple of broken ribs. And he said, you have a lot more than a couple of broken ribs. There's a surgeon on the way, and I'm going to let her explain it to you because I'm really not supposed to interpret the x-ray and give you my opinion. They called her, and she had asked them to do an upper body scan. So I went in for the scan before she got there. Then she arrived. even in the midst of this, I found it humorous. And I thought, man, I wish some of my buddies were here to laugh along with me. But she was called in. She wasn't in the hospital. So she didn't have the doctor's outfit on. She didn't have the stethoscope around her neck. She just didn't look like a doctor. She looked at the scan and she said, you need a thoracotomy, a chest tube. And I said, well, I assume that is what it sounds like, but I've never had an injury of any sort. I've never had a chest tube. What does that entail? And she described the procedure to me. And I said, well, that's barbaric. No, thanks. But give me another option. And she said, you're an adult. You're not inebriated, not even in shock. If you refuse treatment as much as it hurts me, I have to honor that. And I said, I'm not refusing treatment. I'm just refusing the chest tube. Give me another option. And she looked at her watch and she said, you have two choices, either a chest tube or you'll be dead in 30 minutes. Your chest cavity is filling with blood. It's about 1/3 full. And when it reaches a certain point, your heart will stop. The blood will compress the vessels in your chest. You're still bleeding. And the only good thing I can say about it is it will be relatively quick and relatively painless. And I said, I'll take the chest tube, thank you. The funniest part of this, it was funny. We were heading toward the operating room and she asked me where I'm from. And I said, Long Island. And she said, oh, I go to Long Island all the time. And I said, naive me, but do you have family there? And she said, no, my psychic is on Long Island. That's what I thought. Oh, damn it. I wish somebody, some friend of mine was here to hear this. This is ridiculous. I found it hilarious, actually. She described the procedure, and I had just one question. It entails putting a titanium tube through the torso into the pleural cavity, and it's got to be forced through. I said, okay, it goes through the flesh, through the rib cage and through the chest cavity. What stops it? Because I'm not a doctor. I had a collapsed lung, and that's what was the source of the bleeding. And I said, you can live with one lung, but you can't live with no lung. So when that tube is plunged in, what stops it from piercing the other lung? And she said, well, that's my burden. That's where the skill of the surgeon comes in. So that was it. The operation was a success. Oh, by the way, it was painful. That's another thing I'll mention. I got no anesthesia, not even a topical. So it starts with a scalpel, and then it's a lot of procedure. I won't get gory, but no anesthesia. And man, did that hurt. I had to see a pulmonologist and other specialists when I got back home for follow-ups for a couple of years. And I asked the pulmonologist, is there some medical reason why you can't get anesthesia, or at least a local, when you get a chest tube? And he thought it was kind of funny. He said, no reason. Well, why didn't they give me one? And he said, there's no such thing as you don't schedule a chest tube. It's always an emergency. It's always a life and death situation. And the vast majority of the time, the patient is unconscious. So it's just habit. You just do it. I learned my lesson. Next time I need a chest tube, I'm asking for the anesthesia. Anyway, that evening after my first night there, I saw an orthopedic surgeon and a neurologist. And the neurologist said to me, you're not going to appreciate this now, but you'll appreciate it later. You are the single luckiest person on the face of the earth today, because I was walking when I saw the car coming and I just hit the ground. Again, I had about a second. He said, if you had taken one step fewer, that I-beam would have hit your head and you wouldn't be here. You would have died essentially immediately, instantly. And if you had taken one step more, that I-beam would have struck you in your waist below the rib cage, and it would have caused massive internal bleeding, the force of the blow, and you would have just bled to death before they got to you. He also said, this is not where you come when you have the injuries that you have. This is a regional hospital. You belong to a level 1 trauma center. Had you been bleeding at a greater rate, and we would have fully expected that you would have been, given the extent of the injury, you should have been bleeding out faster than you were. You should have died in that ambulance. And even if you made it to the hospital, if you were right on the edge, there was nobody here to save your life. No surgeon here. Everybody had to be called in. So you are super, super lucky to be alive. And that's the way I feel. The force of that blow shattered my scapula, broke 9 ribs, tore my rotator cuff up, caused a massive edema, chest wall trauma, collapsed lung, internal bleeding.
You felt fine. You were good to go.
Yeah. So that's the story. I feel super lucky, and it certainly wasn't a happy story. It wasn't a happy story for the track or for the series or for GM. And I have to say, there's no other experience like staring down the abyss and coming face to face with your own mortality. It's a unique experience, and if you digest it and contemplate it and put it in the right perspective, it can dramatically increase your appreciation for life. And that's what it's done for me. It made me way more committed to enjoy every second. But ultimately, like I said, even the races that I don't enjoy as much, even the travel that I do, I try to find happiness in every single thing that I do. And I try to find some happiness in everything. And that includes this story about the crash of VIR. And I really do. I'm not trying to fool myself. I find happiness in everything. I really do.
Did you ever sit down with Catherine and talk about this experience together?
Yeah, she was going quite fast. And she did what drivers are trained to do, which is take your hands off the steering wheel. When you have no control of the car and you're about to hit something at a very high impact, everybody's instinct to grab that wheel with all your might. And what happens is when the car hits something, that wheel can be jerked suddenly one way or the other with such force that it'll break your wrists, break your arms. So she said that she crossed her arms and she prayed because she was convinced, given the rate of speed, she was convinced that she was not going to come out of that okay. And she did. And she only learned afterwards that somebody else had been injured. She called me the following day, the Monday when I was in the hospital. I went to the next race, which was crazy, another crazy part of the story. And we had a chat at the racetrack. Yeah, she felt terrible, but it wasn't her fault. The crash was not her fault. It was either a tire failure or a mechanical failure in the car. And you know what? Even if it was her fault, I'm a big believer in personal responsibility. I understand the work that I do entails some level of risk, and certain places on certain tracks have a higher level of risk, and I chose to be there. And so I'm responsible. Even if the driver made a mistake that led to the crash, I'm still responsible for me being there. So I accept full responsibility for it.
Up until that point, like we said, nothing had really happened. You know, you get up on the ladders, you're in a tree, you're behind the fences, you're shooting the cars, all life is good. And then this happens. And then you learn from it, you adapt and you overcome. As we've seen at many a track day, whether it's a professional event or it's an HBDE, you know, there's always some sort of trackside photographer at a lot of these events, you know, that are out there either trying to get started to make their name or they're still just kind of plugging away at it. So knowing what you know now, looking back over this incident and your entire career as a photographer, is there some sort of wisdom that you can pass on, maybe some do's and don'ts to these photographers that are out there?
Sure, in terms of safety, absolutely, because photography is a passion-driven endeavor. People who end up in racing photography typically love racing and they love photography. It's a very emotional, personal, passion-driven activity. In that environment, in those circumstances, it can be very easy to take more risks. My photographer buddies and I, we will often say anything for the shot, facetiously, but to some extent, it does apply where you will take risks. It's certainly what happened to me is certainly a reminder that the dangers out there are real, and sometimes it's just not worth it. It's just not worth the shot. And I'll give you another example where I apply that. Lime Rock, which is a beautiful natural terrain road course, a historic road course, can lead to the creation of very beautiful photography. It's a wooded rural area. It's in Connecticut. The tick population is super high. For many years, certain areas, certain shots that to get to those areas, you go through the woods. You just track through the woods. Every year I track through the woods and I come out with ticks on me. They're just in there. And I reached a point just a few years ago where I said, you know, it's not like getting hit by a car where you're bleeding internally, but ticks can lead to serious problems, debilitating diseases, Lyme disease, this and that. I'm super lucky. I've been bitten many times and I don't have Lyme disease or Rocky Mountain spotted fever or any of the other tick-borne ailments, but everybody's luck runs out eventually. I just decided none of these photographs are worth the risk. So my advice is, yeah, I understand the mentality, and I'm not suggesting anybody crawl under a rock or be overly risk averse. As with everything else in life, there's a reasonable balance point, a sensible place to be, to extend yourself, work harder. You're always taking some chances. You get out of bed in the morning, you're taking a chance to advance the art and advance your business. Understand that there's also a line in the sand that you determine that for yourself in many instances. Of course, to some extent, it's determined for us. We're not allowed to go certain places. But even within the realm of the places where we are allowed to go, sometimes it's okay to make that choice and say, I just don't feel comfortable here. And what has changed for me is there are places, and you ask any race photographer who does a lot of racing, there are certain places and certain tracks that just feel less safe than others. Maybe statistically they are, they aren't, but they just feel less safe. There are some places where I just won't go, but there are places where I feel less safe. I still want to get the shot, I still want to go there. I'll just spend less time there. So that's how I, in my mind, mitigate the risk. You just have to make those choices and make smart choices. At the end of the day, we all want to go home to the ones we love. And so you just have to make smart choices.
You said before, Richard, you keep a very, very busy schedule throughout the year. So I have to ask, what's next?
What's next? Usually in past years, this would be kind of the wind down time for me because the racing tapers down. And I do other things. I'm still doing a lot of editorial work and doing a lot of new car photography for Cadillac and Chevrolet and other car companies as well. But the car show season is getting underway with the LA car show and then the Detroit car show. So there's typically one or two new car projects this time of the year. The racing season has slowly but steadily expanded. In the last 2 weeks, I've been in 7 different countries. What's next is, let's see, I'll write some stories for Hemmings. And I have a new book out this year, a new Corvette C8 book. I'll do a book signing. The beginning of January, I will be at home working on that 65 Corvette and doing house stuff and doing some writing, spooching up my dogs. My son's got a car project that I'm immersed in as well. So I'll be helping him to try to get that wrapped up.
Speaking of wrapping up, Richard, we've reached that part of the episode where I like to invite our guests to share any shout outs, promotions, or anything else that we haven't covered thus far.
One thing I can think of is I've written 5 books. 3 of them are in print. The C8 Corvette book was published this year. I wrote a 70th anniversary Corvette book that was published last year, and a C3 Corvette restoration guidebook that was published 25 years ago, but it's still in print.
Oh, and by the way, congratulations on being inducted into the Corvette Hall of Fame.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that is a very, very nice honor. Very much appreciated. I enjoyed the event. It was at the end of August very, very much. It was an opportunity to say a very heartfelt thank you to a lot of people in a very public way. And that was the best part of it for me, was being able to thank all of the people, because I could be the most talented, best photographer in the world and the hardest working photographer in the world. It wouldn't matter. It really does take a much, much larger community to make it all work. I need the support of the people who I work for and the people who I work with, the teams and the drivers and the mechanics. Certainly above all else, the fans, the people who support racing, who love racing and who love the cars. Without them, there would be no racing and no cars. Go Corvette Racing, go Cadillac Racing. I hope the race fans will continue to support those particular programs and as well the series that give them a venue to race in.
Richard Prince has been working as an automotive photographer since 1991 and has a wide range of experience shooting product, motorsports, events, and people. His clients include many of the world's major automobile manufacturers and a diverse array of companies. And if you want to learn more or to check out some of his work, be sure to log on to www.rprincephoto.com or follow Richard on Instagram at Richard Prince Photo. And with that, Richard, I can't thank you enough for coming on Break Fix and sharing your story with us. I have to say, you are the living example of the reason why we tell people stop and listen to other people's stories, especially when you're at the racetrack. You never know what's hiding behind, let's say, the lens or behind that ball cap or behind that t-shirt. There's all sorts of fascinating stories throughout the paddock. And more importantly, have to congratulate you again on all of your achievements.
I appreciate that very much. I must thank you and as well your audience, everybody listening to this, further to what I said about the Hall of Fame induction. Without the fans, without the enthusiasts, without this massive swell of support for the cars we all love and for the racing that we love, I would not have the blessings in this life that I have. And so I really do owe it all to you. Thank you very much.
And remember, always try to find the good in everything, right, Richard?
Absolutely. There is good in everything, and it's a state of mind, and it's out there. Even the things you don't really want to do, there's some silver lining to everything. It is a beautiful way to live. I travel extensively. I've been to every state in the country, and I've been to 30 some odd different countries, and I'm still traveling constantly. And I can say with absolute honesty, I love the journey. I adore the destination. And then I absolutely love coming home. If you can enjoy the journey, enjoy the destination, and love coming back home, you lead a blessed life. It's a beautiful way to live.
Always look on the bright side of life. Always look on the light side of life. If life seems jolly rotten, there's something you've forgotten, and that's to laugh and smile and dance and sing.
We hope you enjoyed another awesome episode of Break Fix Podcast, brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved, be sure to follow us on all social media platforms at Grand Touring Motorsports. And if you'd like to learn more about the content of this episode, be sure to check out the follow-on article at gtmotorsports.org. We remain a commercial-free and no annual fees organization through our sponsors, but also through the generous support of our fans, families, and friends through Patreon. For as little as $2.50 a month, you can get access to more behind-the-scenes action, additional pit stop minisodes, and other VIP goodies, as well as keeping our team of creators fed on their strict diet of Fig Newtons, gummy bears, and Monster. So consider signing up for Patreon today at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. And remember, without you, none of this would be possible.